a way to discover, here's a public YouTube link that's not been shared anywhere, but it's possible that it exists. I think we still have to go through and add these to a playlist for anyone to.
Can you?
Well, I guess they could click on
channel, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I
if it's
guess
public, it's on the channel. If it's unlisted, it wouldn't show up on the channel, but then we could add the playlists and stuff. But
it's not on a playlist yet, which is one problem with this, but this doesn't quite solve it. Okay. All right. So we are live for our Monday deep dive. I have a stop at 12:30, and we cut our time short, so sorry everybody. But let's jump right in. All right, it looks like we got a couple points added. That's good. It's good for us to think about building the agenda throughout the week. So that's great. Anybody, let me see, I'd like to add to this. Any other items? Michelle, looks like these might have been from you, just because I saw some of these things on the channel earlier. So looking at Bryce.
Yeah, I mean, you said not to make them into issues, so I wasn't sure where to put them.
This feels like a good place to put them.
This is good place. This is great. Bryce or Lily, any issues that you wanted to add to the agenda for today?
I had an item last week, we didn't get to it.
That we didn't get to. Okay, let's look at that.
Documentation.
Yeah, you're right. We'll talk about that. Okay. So we can look at that together too.
Also, if we do more abstract stuff, I have questions about like just some like testing architecture that like
So is this a
I'd be
separate
interested to hear. It is like not related to assembly line exactly. It's like just like I am coding this thing. Like we talked about at some point, you know, having kind of more open session type stuff, but I you know, hasn't been able to happen, which I totally understand. But
yeah, I think if we
I'd be
can fit them
interested
in
in
an hour
that
and a
too.
half, then it's good to make space for those. And we could probably plan in advance for certain topics, I would imagine, and that we delay. So on the channel, I said, but I don't think I said it in one of these meetings, we're not going to do a sprint until after our Pew grant deadline. So I think that actually makes sense for a number of reasons, but it does mean that was one of our agenda items from last week that we don't have to follow up on. Let me just say it's not going to happen for a while. But I think people could still do some triaging. I'm trying to keep an eye on our list. So our issue backlog is very large compared to other projects our size, I think. So we should start to think about how to manage and triage stuff a bit. And I think one of the things that we could do is issues can be a brainstorm because they're just an idea. And then we should feel ready to close things that like, hey, this is a great idea, but we're just never going to do it, or it's going to be 2 years away before we could do it. And I don't know.
And we discuss before closing in that way and see kind of like we can set priorities or put certain
that's what
milestones for priorities.
We talk about it in these meetings. They shouldn't just live there forever if they're things that aren't going to be acted on is my guess. If they're just like suggestions for direction, which is some projects, the reason why there's no issue list like that is because there's a roadmap and it just lives in the main developer's head, right? And we're working more collaboratively.
Yeah, I think that's pretty true.
So we could try to take a little chunk of time if people have an idea and they're like, hey, feel it out and see if it's something we're going to ever do. Maybe that doesn't happen until we added it. We're like, oh yeah, maybe that's good. And 6 months later, we haven't worked on it at all. And then we're like, well, it doesn't actually fit the direction anymore.
Is there
things,
like,
but we shouldn't keep things forever that aren't going to ever get done. That's all my
right. Things that aren't ever going to get done. Is there a is there a specific concern you have with issues that just aren't going to get done for a while? Like, what's the concern there?
Because the backlog always grows, so not going to get done for a while can sometimes mean never going to get done. So,
But you
if it's
don't know
really
which
just like-
ones are never going to get done. If they don't remain issues, then they won't ever get done, right?
but if
Yeah,
we
but
revisit that idea, we can find the issue in the, as a closed issue, and it's not like we lost our thinking on it. I don't know.
Okay, for me,
Yeah, it's sort of
the thinking on it is lost. Like that's what happens. Like I don't remember.
Maybe that's
So-
okay. I mean, there's a trade-off for what we can really reasonably do. I mean, the main thing I have about having a super long backlog is we've tried to have code sprint review, right? And it just takes two days to go through our issue list.
That's
So
And
that
often
sounds
we're
like a
saying the same
reasonable.
exact thing we said the last time we did a sprint review, but we have to look at them one by one to
yeah,
decide.
no, I was gonna say, like, the fact that like trying to figure out what is going to be on the sprint takes several hours every time. Like you would 100% cut that in half or more if you just had like less than 50 issues. And you're
Could we
and you're
have-
tackling-
Could we have simply a label or milestone that says like these are backlog issues, or these are nice to haves, these are like these are things that we will consider once everything else has been considered, just so we know, so they don't interfere. I'm saying there might be a different way to deal with it than just removing the issues.
I'm not saying remove the issues. I'm saying we can close them. We can tag them
Without
as-
closing the
Well,
issues.
Well, what is the closing harm? for your
Or
system?
if we do close them, is there a way to tag them so that we know, can we have
We
a
have a
label
won't
that's like
fix.
revisit? So
we have
that
a
it
won't
will,
fix. I don't know if we need to revisit, but
well, won't
just-
fix says that we're not going to do them. It doesn't say revisit them.
I don't.
I don't care if we add another label. That's fine. I
That's
honestly,
fine.
it's a closed issue. That's fine.
Sounds good to me.
I just want to make sure we're building things that are actionable and that we can eventually do. And there's a trade-off. We don't have to like cut things off, but
Yeah,
make
I
the
just,
decision when
I'm
we're trying to
just
treat it.
hearing that like, just, as a kind of mental model for you, closing issues is not losing them. And for me, it is. So I'd like to find a kind of happy
It's
medium
basically
between the
losing
two.
them. I mean, because we have to make choices. We're a small enough team. We have to make choices about what we do. So like, it doesn't mean we can never, ever revisit it. And if we do, we can look at what our notes were when we first thought of the idea. But realistically, it means I'm not closing things that I think, oh, we need to do this, but it's just going to happen in a year. I'm closing things like, we've thought about it. It seems like a good idea, but no one has enough energy to actually work on it. And it's not higher priority than any new thing that's going to come in. That's basically
Right, but it still could be something that, for example, if I had energy, I could go look up the revisit label, and then I could see, are there any of these that I want to revisit now, right? Otherwise, I won't remember. When I have more energy, I won't remember that X item
I get-
ever
I
existed.
get that, but like our issue list is for the whole project. It's not just like a memory bank, right? So I do think we can add that label though. I have no problem with adding that label. So
Maybe add two labels. One basically, okay. If we get, one option is we go through it as a group. And we look at which ones we think we don't ever want to do it. At this point, we think that's done. I mean, we don't need to bother. So that's one label. And then another one is, okay, we don't have resources to do it for quite a while, but in the future, if we need to look back, this is a possible candidate. So this way, if we close 20 and we have 5, we in the future we may look into it, and then we don't have to look at 20, we just look at 5.
I think that's what one label will do, because everything that we want to revisit or that we think can possibly be revisited in the future, then we give it the revisit label, and then the rest of them we just don't look at ever again. So,
Mhm. I was gonna say
Well,
that
then
also,
that's
like,
where I'm thinking, I look at the 5 versus 20. If I use two.
exactly. So you can look at revisit for that label, and if you don't look, and then otherwise you aren't even looking in the backlog, right?
Yeah.
Like if we
No,
just
it's just
close
like-
it, it's closed. And if it's closed, but with the revisit, then it's like something we might consider if anybody has energy at some point to do.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is we close and say, do not revisit. And another one, we close, we do want to revisit or possibly revisit.
I'm saying that
that's
the
what we have.
absence of the revisit is that,
Or
And we
right?
do already have a
Or
won't fix.
could be
That
that.
is
Sure.
explicitly like, we're closing this, it's not implemented, but it's, yeah, so I guess the idea makes sense, but I think we already have won't fix and that sort of covers that. So,
Sure. Sounds good.
yeah. there's-
Like, and won't fix doesn't have to be like, no one can ever look at that issue that we closed again. The main point of it is like, when you add won't fix, you know that it's not like the thing got done. You don't have to try to track through the code to figure out if someone did it. Just like we chose not to do it, right? So that's,
Well, we chose to never do it. Like, we're just never going to,
doesn't mean you
Deal
can
with
never,
doing-
ever think about it again. But
right?
It means we had an
right.
explicit reason for not wanting to do it at that time, whereas revisit sounds like it's more of, we don't really have a reason for not doing it besides just that we are finite beings.
Yeah,
So like,
Yep.
yeah, won't fix it if you have an explicit reason and it will be an issue. Why not? Like, for example, I had an API, or like Michael had been having some API key issue recently with trying to like use the Weaver, and it was because he set it up with the refer like header that Docker symbol lets you use. And like Quentin had properly noted that it's sort of like a bad security thing and is easily spoofed. So we shouldn't really rely on that and allow people to use it for the Weaver. And so we closed it as
Yeah.
one fix because it's like a security issue.
yeah.
okay, so I think I'll add those labels to our main repos. So we already have won't fix. I'll add the potentially revisit. And I'm fine with like, we nominate maybe 5 issues a week or something for us to say like, we're going to see if these should be closed. I don't know if that's a good way to do it, but
Sure.
maybe that's not efficient. I don't know, to spend time every week on things that we don't think are important. But maybe we can nominate them and have a appeal deadline. Who knows?
Oh my
Or maybe
God.
we'll have a meeting next year, Wednesday or Friday, just to spend the time to do this particular.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it also feels like something like if you miss it, then that sounds
It's not
frustrating.
undoable, right?
But yeah, it's true. It's
something
true.
that's lost forever.
It's
I guess we
true.
could default to adding potential revisit when we close things, unless there's a clear reason to not do it, and then add won't fix to it. Is that,
Okay.
then
That
it's like
sounds great.
the bias is towards potentially revisit. Okay, but then like we have a future milestone already. Future is things that we should actively be looking at each sprint review, right? So if that just kept growing and growing and growing, that's actually the whole task of sprint review, is to look at that backlog. And I don't want to have that be too large to actually look at. That's all.
Mhm. That
All
sounds like
right.
a great reason.
All right. So this is a bunch of process stuff. We did cover this process one. Let's see. Any suggestions
Which
for order
process one?
for
Yeah.
2 and 3 are process ones. So is 4. Not really. This is more concrete.
Yeah.
I have a quick demo I could fit in towards the end. I have to leave a little early. I am going to nominate that this goes to,
My thing's still loading.
I'm going to nominate, it's the shared screen. So what is that?
I can't read that fast.
8?
It was the abstract, the architecture questions that you had. wanted to ask.
Okay,
Let's talk about that at the beginning of next week, all right? If that's okay.
for sure.
Because we're basically saying, let's reserve a chunk of our meetings for that. And I think that's a good discussion, but it's not going to actually happen this week. So let's see.
I mean, it's like I have like specific, by then it probably won't be relevant because I'll have made decisions and stuff. I'm just like, it's good to think about coding with coders when I'm trying to code, you know? It is
Yeah,
not a
we can
policy
do it
thing. It's just
asynchronously.
I want to talk to other programmers about my decisions. That's all, you know?
Yeah, I hope people feel it's not the same as doing a real-time conversation, but we could certainly use the channel for some of that. But I'm going
No,
to just
that's
pause
okay,
the
but
discussion
that's not
and
what,
wanted to
yeah,
take
for sure,
for next week.
for sure.
I realize there are going to be some things you didn't get to talk about today, but we also only have about 40.
For sure. I just mean it might not be useful to carry it on to, but sure.
And we can think ahead for other weeks from that.
Okay.
Lily, can we try like reserving like maybe 15 or 20 minutes for this, just since you got bumped from last week, and then we'll go on to the next issues on the list. So I'm going to stop my sharing. Do you have anything you wanted to show us, or you just wanted to have a discussion about the?
I do have things to show.
Okay.
I tried, but it
I'll
will
stop.
take a little time. I don't know if I can finish in 15 minutes. It may go longer, but we'll see. All right, so the documentation site, Michelle showed me a website where it talked about the principle, which I think is going to help improve this documentation website. Basically, it says there are four types of documentation.
It's the one Bryce linked, so I think at least Bryce is familiar.
Okay, all right. So you have tutorial, explanation, how to, and reference. So I think keep that in mind. Is definitely good to help us improve the document. I mean, the website right now, the last week when I first had questions about this is where I see, okay, here for the reader, we have an overview, and then we have customizing the interview. But then here, the generated code is in the end. So to me, the order should be, you have an overview, and then you say, okay, now let's start to do it, and then we generate the code, and then we customize the interview. So the order is kind of confusing to me. So that's one thing. Then also some of the pages are so long, like this one is just one long page. We can probably cut it into separate sections and have several pages. And same thing, like does this belong to here, or should this be part of how people do things beyond here? And then when I saw this page, I was thinking, first I thought this is about the documentation template file, but then I realized, oh, this is actually about this website style. So they basically how this work that we can put into it to improve this website. Because the website, I think it's important in terms of how to educate people or guide people through it. And we spent a lot of time building the tools, which is, of course, the absolute necessary work. But no matter how good a tool or product is, if people don't buy into it, then you really limit its usage. So I think this website is definitely something that we can put more work into it so that more people can using this website as their guide or teacher or whatever to help them learn the tools much easier. So that's one point I want to bring up. And the next thing is that I'm thinking we had some architecture graphs. We can probably add a page to this website where we show people how this whole tool is putting together. I know probably not everyone is interested. Maybe a lot of people are not interested in the beginning, but that doesn't matter because there are people who are interested. The way I think of it is like when you go to visit a museum, when you walk into the door, they give you the plan, the floor plan. A lot of people don't read it, but some people read it, right? So it depends on your background, your purpose of coming to the museum. Some people eventually will use it. And I think the architecture graphs will be like that kind of floor plan to show people who are interested. So by that, I'm going to show you what I was thinking. So this was we had last year when we started. And so based on this graph, I created a new one that basically show you how all the components of the assembly line work together. So you start with the weaver, which generates
Can I just understand before we go too deep, right? Are
Okay.
we going to be, for this discussion item, do we want to dive into this? Because I think this deserves a discussion all of its own, or we want to talk about what's in the documentation? Because like an overview of what we're doing with the documentation, I feel is like a very different conversation from like, what does this diagram look like?
I don't know how much time we have. I was hoping we would spend half an hour on it, but doesn't look like we have it. So Quentin, what do you want to do?
Well, I think we probably
I think they're both
could do
good
some things in
topics.
parallel, right? Like if we start with the overview part of the documentation, then we could start to look at this, but there might be some like quick discussion points we can have on the documentation that will help answer, like they'll help guide like where do you want to put this, which is part of what you need, right?
Right.
I think you had some good points about the naming of doc style guide. We could probably rename it to like editing this documentation.
Yeah. Or like, I think it'd be nice if we could put it under a contributing header or like header block. And so we could have like this, but also like how to like if you want to add a question to AL library or like assembly line, the runtime, like how do you do that? And but this makes more sense if someone's only thinking about, oh, I want to contribute back to the project. How can I do that? And we can have, hey, you can write documentation. This is how the style guide is.
Yeah, I like that header. That actually reminds me, Bryce, you had found like a guide to writing documentation that looked really helpful.
That was the one that I think Michelle Lilly had mentioned that Michelle had reposted a few places.
Oh, okay. All right. Is
and
that it's on the?
And it's, yeah, and I think it's mostly, I think it matches, I think, a lot of the issues that Lily mentioned of like right now, or at least if you think about it, how most of the documentation, I think, was essentially like, here's a very long Google Doc where we're writing down a lot of thoughts in very, very detail. And so there's some graph, but essentially it's like, it breaks down into you have documentation that's like less detail of like, I just want to get started, like give me a tutorial that's relatively short. And there's documentation that's more detailed of like, here's the entire long explanation of like what every line of code in your AL Weaver generated interview is doing. And we have a lot of the very, very documented things, and we don't have a lot of the sparser documented things. And I think that we just need to separate. We need to probably, it might be a bit redundant, but we should probably have some shorter tutorials and shorter documentations that then link to this longer thing.
Looking at the actual like guide, I think would help give context, because it's not really like just broader and narrower. It has specific purposes, which I think is useful. But
yeah, sure. There's also like
function, there's a functional way to think about it, right? Too.
Yeah.
And then I think these diagrams would go under an about, right? Like we might have an about, like about the Weaver,
right.
About the project and about the code. Maybe would be headings. I don't know.
So
Um,
I think there's a place in that in that square of 4 topics for that to go for sure. Like if we want to go, we can go to that Divio. It's called divio.com.
And this one definitely is out of data. I mean, we have much more than just 2. Oops. So I'm thinking once we put the picture there, and then we can put the links to all those components there. And also we should probably cross-reference in each of those components, README file, add a link to this website so that however people get to either side, they can always go to look at the other side. And, oh, here's
Totally.
the problem, here's the documentation.
Yeah. So where appropriate, it should link to like the appropriate page in the documentation.
yeah, it would be nice if this were a place we could link on every form, right? But I don't think it is right now. I think this page doesn't really give you that like at a glance view of what the assembly line project is yet.
Right. No,
I'd want to make this page should be shorter, I think, probably, for example.
which one?
This page right that we're on right now.
Are they about?
Yeah. Like usually people don't have to scroll 3 times to get to understand what a project is. Well, this actually is only 2 times.
I'm not sure if this is the right page for like the about page to link to, because there are like live facing pages that are like, hey, common user, here is what our project is about. Whereas this is like, if you want to work on document assembly line projects, then this is the like documentation you look at.
Right.
Yeah, like
So-
we already have a courtformsonline.org/about that
That is
is like a 1-pager. You can look at it on one screen, and it's much higher level of like, we're helping with access to justice, and like all of this is open, and here are the people we work with. And it's much like this about page is much more, you are an author trying to write like with, or you, a DocAssemble author trying to integrate and use some like assembly line questions, like about like, what is this project even about? But it's like written for that audience as opposed to the general user. So I don't really think that this is the right page to link to from live interviews on an about
Right.
page.
That's fair. Yeah. The only thing I'll say is like on the about page, it does have a link to the project's website, like learn more on the project's website. And
And that
that
makes sense. I think that's fine.
is
But
the old version of this page. I think it's kind of outdated.
Yeah, this page, I think it
Much
probably
better.
needs a review and an update, but I'm thinking to remove this section repository to the architecture page. That's going to be added after the about.
Well,
Mhm.
that's definitely
That's
something.
where you see how these projects are putting together, and underneath you add all the links to each of them.
That makes sense to me, to have that diagram and those links like
You
on
might
the
have
same page.
want to have the links more than one place, but I don't think it's
Well, as we said, we add links on this on the website and on each of those component repository README, we add a link to the website, so they link together.
I think that's good. Here's where I think maybe if we had like an about heading and there were some subheadings underneath, one of those might be like a place where someone can quickly jump to figure out what are the repositories. If that's their only purpose, we should make it easy for them to find that too, I think, on this page. So I would usually not find that on an architecture page, but it should also go there, I think. But if we went to something, I don't know, if you look, I'm trying to think of a good example.
I would personally, I think there's a discussion to be had here about like where we split things into separate pages. And I think generally speaking, keeping them on one page until there's like a compelling reason for them to be separate, like they are confusing each other, or because like, for example, when we saw the usability page, there's a lot of information in there, but it really is all to do with usability, and it's a reference material. It's not, like like even if, there are categories under which to split it, I'm not sure it really should be split into multiple pages just to have it on multiple pages. So,
Well, for references, that makes sense, but I don't think that makes sense outside of references, which like about is not really a reference. And honestly,
yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't mean that about was a reference. I'm sorry. I just mean like
Well, even
Um,
reference, look at
that
here.
just to be
Here we're
aware-
saying this reference and we split it into separate pages because each one has.
well,
its
that's the
own-
way it got generated.
yeah, I think that's a technical constraint.
And And also, like they are separate modules, whereas this is all one category of thing. Like AL courts is separate from AL document, which is separate from AL general, but these are all usability, like language items.
Yeah, but suppose I'm not interested in everything. So even when you buy a reference book, they give you chapters because different people have different needs. They don't need to go through the whole thing to look for their particular stuff. They can just glance the table of contents. Oh, this part is what I'm interested. Instead of
I think the main
reading.
problem with this
I think
page
this
is
is-
just like the information hierarchy is kind of messed up. Like it's a design issue mostly. I think it's fine for this to be on one page to me, but I think to have
We can break
section
it up
with one
into
sentence
categories.
doesn't really make sense. So I like if we had those as numbered items with an explanation right after them, maybe it would be more readable. I don't know. That might be a help.
Yeah, I think that would be a good thing for me because yeah, I agree with Michelle that like it should all be like this is a reference and this should all be on one page. And it makes it harder since we still don't have a search because HG Agnola hasn't ever responded, I think to like actually giving us a search API.
Or
And so,
David
like-
hasn't, yeah.
Yeah, and I assume if David had gotten it, he would have mentioned it at a Tuesday at some point. But like so we do want like if it's about usability, it should be on the usability page so it's searchable. But we also like I think it is mostly overwhelming and it feels like a lot when it's really not like it is like a lot, but it's not like an incredible like overwhelming amount. It's just we need to, like Quentin said, reorganize the hierarchy.
If we wanted some good examples, and we shouldn't reproduce what is already there, but I think usability.gov is where we should look because they have a lot of very simple content. It's not like super over designed. Like they didn't have to, like you can look at it, it's like, oh, I could do this without having to learn a bunch of tools. That's what I mean by not over designed isn't necessarily right. But it's not really intensive design, but it's very easy to navigate, I think.
Yeah, there's also the separate question of, I guess, like this is choices we've made for our stuff, and maybe it's useful to have documented somewhere, but I don't know if it's like here's some documentation on like plain language guides. Does it make more sense to just link to certain spots of like plainlanguage.gov or usability.gov and like other orgs that are doing a lot of similar work?
So these are specific ones that we have people check for on the checklist.
I see.
So check through these things. We like took a subset of those things and said, these are the ones we want our developers that we think are clear enough for people to just look for before they go through a plain language review.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think just different layouts to organize it might be really helpful. Like I think I'm looking at plain language or usability.gov. I think there's some other ones that are more
Plainlanguage.gov
just like a
is
list of plain language things to say. I'm trying to figure out. I've taught this in the class before. I can't remember the link.
Willie, would it be at least reasonable to explore a change in format before exploring separating these into different pages? Does that sound like a reasonable course of research before separating into separate pages?
I think I'm gonna stop sharing, just let you guys to share whatever examples you think.
I mean, some of it's just the default style of DocuSource is interesting. Like it's more constrained. There's like needs to be a little bit more white space.
Yeah, I've messed around with it. We can mess around with it some more. This
Here's
isn't the
one.
default style. These are our styles, but I found some other things very confusing about it. So
So like here, like I feel like this is, there's a navigation on the right. These are actually very short paragraphs, but I find the spacing makes it a little bit easier to read the content.
if the whole page was like this, I'm not sure that, but okay.
Anyway, there's not necessarily one answer to it from just the one example that I've shown here, but
Sure.
sure.
Okay, so I like the navigation on the right where at least I don't have to scroll down the whole page. I can just click on these links.
We do have a thing on the right, Lily.
Yeah, there is. It is a long list, so for whatever that's worth, it could probably be made shorter, but by just grouping some of the suggestions and tips. So you don't necessarily need a separate navigation element for each tip, but maybe you do if people are finding it from the style guide checklist and they want to be able to go back and find the rule really quickly. I don't know. That's something to keep in mind. But I do think people, our goal for that list is like, you can sit down and read the whole thing, right? Like that is our goal, because it's something people should keep in mind when they're designing their interviews on every screen. So it should never be like 100 rules. It should be short enough you can just sit down and read in one go. Okay, but I think that's really all we have to say about that is like, did what Michelle's asked make sense? And do you want to think about that more, Lily?
I think I'm still
we can
confused. I just want to comment on what you said. You said, okay, the design is for people to go read through the whole thing. Well, that sounds like it's not a reference. You don't want people to read a reference from top to the bottom. Reference means when you need something, you go pick up that particular thing. So I think we may need to actually think about what is the content. Well, first, maybe just to categorize what the content belongs to which of those quadrants: explanation, how to, tutorial, and reference. Because each part has its own kind of rules or principles that is how you write it. And right now, that's where I feel I'm confused as to the nature of that content. Which one does it belong to? Is it how to? Is it explanation? Is it the reference? So.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I mean, I could be wrong about people sitting down and reading the whole thing. I just know it's a set of rules we want people have in mind when they're writing their content and to be able to digest quickly before they do like a more formal plain language review with someone like Caroline, which we can't even count on happening forever, right? Like we want people to be able to look at it and do it on their own to some extent, but work through everything on the list. Well, do you have enough guidance to make some more progress on this?
Me?
Yeah.
No, I
Or
don't.
do you want, the other thing we talked about is bringing Aubrey into this conversation.
I don't actually know how to add content or change content on this website. I mean, it looks like I have to add an empty file to add a page, right? But how do you arrange the order to say, okay, I want it in this particular place versus just let it, I mean, I'm fuzzy, I really don't know.
Before Aubrey started, we actually don't know how much time she has left because we are getting towards the end of the summer. Classes are going to start on the 23rd. But I wonder if we should train you and Aubrey at the same time to do that, potentially. What kind of computer do you have? Windows, Mac?
Windows.
Okay. So Windows 10?
Yeah.
I feel like we might want to, we could do this in 2 tiers. Like the first would just be to have you try writing the markdown files. And then the second could be trying to generate it and make sure that they work before you do a pull request. So we could easily just, the markdown format that you can look at it and just add your own files. I think that's really easy to see how that works. And then we could help merge it when it's time to merge.
Okay, that sounds good.
The thing that's trickier is images need to go in a specific directory, but it's not too big of a deal.
Can I just directly add the image file to GitHub?
You could, and you'd want to like, then you have to figure, how do you reference the images? Are there examples of images in some of these pages?
Yeah, it's I saw it on the overview of the Weaver. There's an image there.
Okay, so that's probably enough actually. And if you click the GitHub link on any page, it'll take you to, oh no, I'm wrong about that. If you click the edit this page button at the bottom, you'll see.
Share screen.
Yeah.
I think it might be tough for the kind of changes that Lily is talking about to just edit one page at a time. Definitely you can make a new branch for it and then like go in GitHub and edit files there. It'll be a lot of individual commits, but.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying that Lily should do it one commit at a time per page, because she's talking about adding new pages, but I'm saying this will be a way to see, here's the page, here's the code.
Right.
Side by side. So that could be a way to learn the syntax. And you should probably group them all into one branch, the changes that you want to make. Yeah, and then we can test them more easily.
Lily, I'm sorry if I've forgotten. Have you used the command line before on your computer?
Not much.
Okay.
I use a little bit.
That's
I
cool.
mean, like,
Yeah.
what's it called? Power something. Windows.
PowerShell?
PowerShell, right? Is that good enough?
I think you could, if you installed Git, you could use PowerShell to do this. I would use, I really like and prefer the workflow of WSL, Windows Subsystem on Linux, because you can compile the code and everything. But if all you're doing is editing files and you're using the model of old ones, then you don't have to use it at all.
I used GitHub desktop. That allows me to like download, upload to Git.
Okay. Cool.
That work?
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
You don't need to be able
That would be perfect.
source
It has
that
command line.
workflow. So yeah,
Cool.
and there's a lot of content work to happen here too, right? So we don't have to prioritize the code part, the hosting server part. Okay. So is that enough direction for now? I think we could also create some individual issues on the assembly line documentation repo to help track some of that work.
Yeah. But I think probably we will need I need to talk about this graphs next week or whenever I have time.
That seems reasonable. Okay. So we have about 25 minutes. Let's see. This, I think, flows in pretty well to this issue that you added, Michelle, which is where should, I guess I don't quite know what the question of this is.
So,
It's like describing the structure of the repository, essentially.
so we have said in assembly line, there's a lot of files in the questions folder, and it has been confusing to know what's in each file. We said we would enumerate that somewhere, but we haven't yet. So I thought I'd bring it up again. And the question is, where is that information going to live, and what will be in the README of that folder or elsewhere to point to that documentation, or like, how are we going to guide people? How are we going to guide people from, looking at that folder to understanding what's inside it?
So I think that what we should do is put it in the readme.md and have a link there to the documentation webpage, which can go into more detail than the readme.md if it needs more.
If it needs more detail, like if you can write what's in each file in like a sentence, then I don't even know if we need something in the documentation.
That's what we come down to.
Okay, and then that would go where if it's not in the documentation?
In data questions / readme.md.
Just confirming. Cool. Okay.
Sorry, I missed the beginning. And which repository are we talking about? Is this in general or?
Assembly line.
Yeah. So like, just what are the files in this folder, basically, right? What do they mean?
Yeah. What does each one do? Yeah.
More
Yeah,
here.
I have a graph for it.
So that could be like a link to from this page too, which I think is a good idea.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess should the README MD be here or the top level? I'm fine with it being in the folder. That's easy to find in context, I guess.
I see. I feel like this README gets overwritten more
Yeah.
and is also very confusing to read on the
Yeah, that was my feeling as
PRs.
well.
But yeah, I'm not sure. It is
But in the past, like,
more discomfortable.
there has been. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like a pretty much of a standard. So if we wanted to track whether a README was written, I'm fine with creating an issue that says add a README to this folder. It seems clear enough to have as a point.
Yeah, I mean, as long as it is, that's add documentation, and then
So I see you added this one. I think I commented on a little bit. I don't think we need another review process other than code review. I'm fine with us. So I'm just going to read this out loud. Sorry, just jumping into the question. So this point number 4 is, at what point do we review variable names that people choose? And I can see a lot of reasons that having a really formal process is helpful. I don't know that it makes sense for our project based on our size, but I do think people can comment on that during code review if they see confusing variable names. That's my thought on it. That's framing. We could add more discussion and thoughts on it.
so I have some thoughts. So one thing is that a lot of times, from what I've understood, you find it obstructive for PRs and reviews and PRs to take a long time. So I've specifically not brought up stuff that might take a longer discussion, like names. Names often take a longer discussion. And so then there's just one person looking at it. So there have been like plenty of times where like we now have names that I think are confusing, that are hard to change because it's too far gone at this point. And so like the PR did not seem like the appropriate place to handle that.
Well, I think part of living with a project of this size and with our resource level is going to be that not every choice is one that we've made by consensus. So I am personally okay with names ending up in the code that not everybody finds clear if it means the code was written and it works.
I mean, names that are internal, like that we can change anytime, sure. But outward facing names that are confusing, I think is not useful, or, we should have a way to migrate from one name to another, or.
I'm with Quentin though, that like the thing with the issue, like I understand like refactoring and having better names is always a good thing, but the way DocAssemble works, like 80% of the variable names are outward facing. And so it's less of like, it's like it's sort of not like I don't really want to say it's like a Pandora's box of like, oh, we start doing one, we then like the other ones that we haven't changed stand out more. And the only way to really change all of these is like hard breaks, which we've done one and we changed a few things, but it has even sort of plagued us until today of like, there's a lot of confusing things and weird migrations from MA Virtual Court to now. And so I feel like it's not, and just the way DocAssemble works, it's more difficult to do, like have clean upgrades and like versions, and we are deprecating certain variable names. We're using this name instead. Like just the way that it works, you can't have one, or it's a lot more difficult to have, or it's a lot more difficult, a lot more like finicky, fragile to have something that like, oh, we're gonna have one question that sets like 3 different variables to the same thing, and these other ones are deprecated, but we don't really have a way of letting authors know that they're deprecated unless they go and look at the source, and it just sort of spills out. And I'm more for like just like it's like it's not optimal to have good names, but we should 100% document like, oh, okay, like this is what this is. It's named like this because like this is originally what we're using for, and like all the entire process. But I just don't think it's feasible, or not that it's not feasible, but it's not a good use of the project's time to change change all of these old variable names, given how difficult it is to change variable names in DocAssemble. And we're more likely to break other people's interviews and make them frustrated with the project and not use it, as opposed to like it's clearer to read. Like it would be clear to read, but only for new people who are just now coming. I don't know. Those are my thoughts.
Keep in mind, like it's mostly us, right? So we're making it clearer for us to read, but there aren't that many other people looking at the variable names in really close detail. So I would say like, yes, if there is a big problem with the variable name, raise it at the pull request, or at least before it gets.
Yeah, I'm not comfortable doing it in the pull request.
Sorry, what?
I'm not comfortable doing it in the pull request because that's like just a very like bad way to communicate. Like I have caused frustration before and it's not comfortable.
Well, if it's not big enough to hold up the merge.
Nothing for me is big enough to hold up a merge unless it's breaking things.
So maybe there's just needs to be a little bit of accepting the discomfort of having names that aren't perfect. Then I don't really know. I don't think
if you want me to change the way I do that.
If we're going to say we don't want to take time in the code review process to reflect on names, then I don't think adding another separate process will be more efficient. Like we have to change one or the other, or it doesn't matter, right? Like it's one, or if it's important enough to matter, I don't see how, and the reason we're not putting in code review is for time. Like I don't see it makes sense to add another separate process for it.
Can there be a request in the pull request review to discuss the change as opposed to like having a text back and forth that takes 3 days? You know,
sounds very specific. So it feels like
if there's a name and I go, hey, so why is this called this? It looks like it does something else. And then you say, well, this is the reason and blah, blah, blah. And I say, well, maybe it would be better if blah, blah, blah. Like that's a long conversation as opposed to like a 15-minute conversation in person. But if you, I don't know, like it's like I suspect that would be, I'm concerned about the frustration that it will cause other people. I'm happy to, I do not feel urgent about pull requests. So I do not feel blocked by them. So if other people are okay having longer pull requests and a longer time that a pull request is open, then that's the way I will do it.
Well, I would just think really carefully about like what kind of name feedback is important to raise. So like if it is important enough for us to change later, it's important enough to raise it code review statements, right?
Yeah,
But if it's
Yeah.
just like you have a different style, we don't have one universal style for a project, and we could start to try to build that. I don't think I want to spend a lot of time doing it though.
Hold on. I thought there's some documentation on the Docker website of how you name things, right? If people are following those rules, then
and a lot of those rules are, I think, being followed. There I think
The-
maybe
the-
might be
the
one or
rule-
two that aren't, but
The syntax rules are often being followed. There's a
Yeah.
lot of places where like different naming conventions are being used, and like, I mean, that's a discussion point in and of itself, was that like we established a rule, but like we're not using it. But the like what you name it, as in, you know, this, you don't name a color that's blue, you don't name it red, right? So like it's just like, is this name clear when we're using the variable, right? Like what is the meaning of this name, type of thing.
So here's the thing I think would be really efficient for code reviews, which wouldn't require a lot of back and forth. Like if you have a suggested new name, just put it in the comment on the pull request, and then the author can decide whether to accept it or not. But if like having to have someone explain their reasoning is a slow thing, I think you're right, because that invites a back and forth.
yeah. And like if the author doesn't accept it, I think they should have to explain their reasoning just so it's documented of like, why is it named like this? But yeah, I feel like it mostly does come down to like the author's sorry, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I guess at least my takeaway from like listening to this is I agree, but like I it's one of those, I understand that like it feels weird and you don't want to hold up like pull requests too long, Michelle, but like I think just like taking a step back and knowing that like, yeah, DocAssemble is harder to change later. Like this is not quite a framework that's meant for like refactoring easily among multiple packages and like multiple users of a package. So like the more time we spend up front getting the name right is better time, I think. And so I would encourage, even if it feels like a small name change, doing them up front is better. And I appreciate name changes and stuff like that. And it takes me it's mostly like, I feel like incorporating feedback, it takes like maybe like a day or so of thinking about it and being like, okay, just getting used to in your mind, like thinking about it as that name, that makes sense, and then changing it. And so like some that's just how PRs sort of go sometimes. Of like if you have like it does take a few days sometimes, I think, to incorporate changes. And I think that's honestly fine. Like I know like sprints are weird because sometimes we want to get a lot of PRs in quick. And especially if you have other work that's dependent on those PRs. But like I think it might make some more sense for stuff that's going in YAML to take more time. Those are just my thoughts.
Does that feel like something that's comfortable for you to do, just to suggest like, hey, suggested this name?
I was muted. Sorry. Yeah, I was saying like that I think that is a good, like I would be open to trying that and seeing how it goes. Sounds good.
All right. So let me see. We have 10 minutes. Maybe we can do these both quickly. I'd love to do the demo, but it's not too important. All right, so we have things that are in AL Toolbox. This specific example was collapse template. And the question is, should we make people include one file, a YAML file with both of the features that it exports? Or is it okay to have them import a module in a CSS file for that kind of functionality? And particularly if when that's not needed for anybody who's using the assembly line was my comment to it. And my thought is, sure, that's fine. I actually went back and looked at the toolbox, and then I realized there is one feature that has a YAML file like that.
Yeah, it's the way I think I built the phone number one.
I don't
Was
know which
it?
one.
Or
it is now, off the top of my head.
the birth date or something.
That looks like I built the phone number one, yeah, because it's included JavaScript.
Button.
CSS.
So maybe there's more than one
module.
because the copy button one was the one I had found. That is
But I
set up
think
that way.
examples should have like example, whatever, and then other ones that are actually to be pulled in should have a name that doesn't have example in it.
I think, yeah, if we're going to have both kinds of files in here, I think they do need to have different names for sure in the files.
Or maybe we can just go back to what we had originally. Put the examples in the other repo where we had.
I think we found that pretty hard to like maintain. That was one of the reasons we switched to having them in a single repo, because you'd have to go back and forth between like, okay, now I've installed the package, but I'm developing on it, so I don't want to break it for other people, so I can't install it. So how do I test it in this other interview, right? Like you couldn't, like the development process was difficult.
But you still have to install it.
You install it, but after, like, if you can test it inside one interview, then you don't have to install something that's not working yet, right? If you want to develop it, you can keep developing it in place, and then you'll install it when it's ready. But like, if you have like the example in a different package, then you have to keep installing as you're developing. Like you're like, I changed something. Okay, now I install it.
I think people aren't responding more because they're just thinking about it. I don't think we have to explain.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So do we want to have this be the way we build all of the features? Seems fine to me. I don't really want to go back and add that for things that don't have it yet, if they don't stop things on the assembly line from working. Because I just have I have a big backlog of things to work on, and this is
we don't have to break what isn't there. I mean, like we don't have to break old uses of it just to make new uses of it convenient, and to think about that when we're moving forward. That's all.
Well, I hope we're not breaking anything. Now I'm confused because I didn't think anything we're talking about related to breaking existing stuff.
You said you don't want to have to change.
I don't want to have to add anything to this repo for functionality that's working everywhere in the assembly line, because it's not requiring including a file from here.
Right. So that's what I'm saying is I'm not planning for us to break anything. Right.
Again, nothing would be breaking if we added a file. Like, that's not my point. But
you expressed the concern, and I'm saying, yes, I agree. I think we won't have to do that.
Yeah, I was interpreting what you were saying, Quentin, as like, let's not change stuff in assembly line so we don't break it, was I think the unsaid part that me and Michelle are hearing. But
okay. Yeah, no,
yeah.
All right. I just don't want to have to touch stuff that's working that people aren't using.
Yeah.
To add new functionality that people who aren't part of our project would be using. That's all. But I'm fine if other people want to add stuff to here. I'm not worried about breaking stuff. I'm worried about adding new things here that we don't really need to meet some convention. But I don't know if that helps. Maybe doesn't.
I mean, I'm not sure what you're saying to not add, because I thought you just said that it's okay to add what we were discussing. So I'm not sure if you're saying something different, or
I'm saying I do not personally want to revisit any code that I've added that doesn't have one of these.
Got it. Got it.
I don't think it's needed for any projects that we have. Like, I want to build features that people are using, not to try to think about every theoretical use that doesn't exist in front of us yet when we're trying to prioritize what we could.
Sure. I mean, in our project, I find like the separate, it doesn't matter, but I think this is fine, whatever. Like there are reasons I think it impacts our project negatively, but I don't think they're critical. So I think it's fine.
All right, so last week, just in a couple of unrelated projects, the issue of testing came up. And when we were meeting with the folks from Illinois and Louisiana this week too, it came up again really, which is how often people need to run their interviews when they're developing them. So I wanted to revisit this idea of having a way to load and manage answers, what I'm calling answers, in a way where people could use them in different interviews and copy over the information from one to the other. So there are a few places where there could be more discussion about it. And I just thought I would show you what I have so far, which is the first thing I just built is like a proof of concept. So there's this interview here, which lets you see all of your answers on the server. And it will grab the title and the subtitle. Some of our interviews have subtitles, which is like the party's name, but not all of them do. But at least we can put the date really easily to give people some context. And so I have this petition to change name of adult, which is an interview where I got all the way to the end and I've said, the user role, the names of the parties, the addresses, and so on. And then I'm just going to select that. And then I can start a new session of this repair and deduct letter, let's say. I don't think people think about the answers in this exact way, but this is the basic functionality, like copy from my old answers to a new one. But this is a combo box, so I could start typing and it will filter down to the item that I need. There are some scalability issues. So DocAssemble pages interviews after you have 100 saved sessions. So, and it's quite slow actually, when you get to larger numbers of sessions. Because of the database structure that Jonathan chose, there's no way to like tag some of the things that you'd really want to use for filtering your interviews without decrypting the interview and loading the whole interview into memory. And it's just done like really inefficiently. But let's see. So this is interesting because it's said here the name is wrong, obviously. So there's more variables I need to filter, but there's a lot of questions that I do have to answer still. This particular interview. This is an MABC one, that's part of the issue. But I should not be asked for my name or my address because those are already provided in the other interview. So that is the basic functionality that exists now. And then I was thinking about what would actually make this useful for people. You can see here, I didn't give my name this time, but it should be here. Doesn't look like it actually is, for whatever reason. Maybe this interview didn't use those variables correctly. Either way, all right. I did get this working on a different interview. That was a little bit easier to demonstrate, so let me try that. It might be helpful.
I mean, I trust that it does what it says it does, or if not now, then it will. I think if we're examining kind of like the use of it, I think this looks like a good way to use it.
All right, so what I was starting to think about is like, how do we manage a list of sessions? And I was thinking sessions have to be tied to an interview in DocAssemble. So I thought maybe we should actually just make an interview to store those saved sessions. I think that could be a simple way to do it, like it's tied to this, and they could each get unique names. And I was trying to play around with where that would show. I think for now, it only makes sense in the dev environment. and I borrowed this from a demo I saw given by Community Lawyer a while ago, which this I thought was, we let people click a snapshot button. They can name their answers at that point with whatever they want that's descriptive. The snapshot button automatically adds a session to this kind of pre-named interview that we're using just to store sessions that are saved. And then people can click this fast forward button to load in a saved session. And the saved session can be from that predefined save point that we've given a name, or it could be from one of their other existing interviews. So as long as they're using our variable name conventions, they can save some of the progress that they needed to get to the interview a little bit faster. And if you're using it in the same literal interview, there's a lot that someone would save, right? Because
And that gets you, and sorry, so snapshot and fast forward be shown on every interview on dev?
on dev only, yeah, is my thought. I think we could think about how to wrap up this feature for end users, but I think just getting the usability right is more complicated. But I think we could explain it to developers, and it's useful for developers really quickly.
I'm still a little bit confused about like what if you like, can you combine from like, does your current snapshot override whatever your last snapshot was? Is there only one snapshot, or like is a snapshot?
There would be more, as many
for the
snapshots as
whole-
you wanted, and it would be all of the interview session at that point when you click the snapshot button. But one thing I did have to do is filter out variables. So that's one of the things where it's going to have to be iterated on. Let me see.
Sorry, Lily, were you going to say
There are a lot of
something?
irrelevant.
Yeah, I want to say this can be extremely helpful to the developers. I was just wondering how you where did you get the session names? Because it sounds like that's where you do the snapshot, where you give it a name, right?
Yeah, I was starting to think about this. So I'm just thinking like, we'll give it a label. And I was trying to see if there's a way to get it from the interview dynamically. I think it's going to take a couple of steps, but essentially my thought is if we go to my interviews, and I have to sign off, I'm a little bit late to my next meeting, but we're going to use this title for the interview. And then some of them have a subtitle. So we would go to the subtitle as well. And that's what you would see in that list, but we would let people customize this fully.
So,
So
then
if
in
they
other
want to
words,
name their
layer
saved
people-
session interpreter notice Jane Smith, that's fine. That'll be the default. But if they don't, they could name it like testing with 10 children or something. Does that make sense?
Sure, custom name. Very, I like the idea of a custom name.
Do that answer your question too?
Who did that answer?
Lily
who?
had a question. I wasn't sure if that answered it.
Oh, yeah. I was thinking this tied to, I think one of the requests I heard last year or something, that people wanted to see some notes or something on this screen where they can identify which session they ran for what purpose.
Right.
So even for testers during the development stage, that if when they run an interview, at the end of it, they can save the name, put some notes, and then that will not be overwritten. Because right now, I think if you run interview multiple times, sometimes I get multiple records here, sometimes I only get one record.
Yeah.
That part is still a mystery to me. So we need
Well,
to,
when you click save and run from the playground, that's what happens. It erases the old session. So this would avoid that problem too. Like if you click the save snapshot from the playground, you're saving it to a dedicated place in the database that won't get overwritten
okay.
from a new save and run on the main interview. Anyway, I mean, I'm pretty late for my next meeting, so I should sign off, but I just wanted to show this to people and get thoughts. And if people have more thoughts, welcome them. But it sounds like this is something that's worth spending a little time on.
Oh, definitely. I've been looking forward to seeing it. So,
Let me see how much I I'm really just trying to scale back my ambitions for what it does. And that's why I'm also prioritizing developers only for the feature for now.
Yeah, yeah.
So we can actually get something people can start playing with.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
think that's actually probably the most valuable pitch.
Okay, cool. Yeah, a lot of people working on this. And like Bryce, I think we tasked you on this when you first started. So it's a different, much broader scale event, which is part of why like it didn't get finished because it's just too big.
Yep. Yeah, I think this is a much better scoping. So
Okay.
Um,
All right. Well, I'm going to
Yeah, this is great,
talk with you
so-
all later.